Welcome to our podcast, The Words That Make Us.
Consider this time with us as your excuse to take a break from everything.
Every episode, we choose a word that makes us think, wonder, or dream. We read a range of texts that explore different aspects of this word.
And we let our thoughts wander. We hope that yours will too. So grab your favourite tea.
Or a beer.
And join me, Rama
And me, Tony Bailey. Let's go!
So today's episode is about guilt.
Hi, Rama.
Hey.
Oh, you've got a strange look on your face.
What look on my face?
You look like you've done something you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Come on, fess up. What have you done?
I didn't know it was Burger Day today. And so...
Thursday's always Burger Day.
I didn't know that. You don't have to tell me that. Now I'll know, and now I'll eat it every Thursday. Well, yeah, my plan was to eat, good old diet food today, and then I saw the burger, and I ate the burger, and I feel quite guilty about it. So there.
Quite guilty or really guilty? You look really guilty about it, to be honest.
I do feel really guilty. That was not the plan today. But
actually, after the food that gets served up most of the week, I don't think you have any right to feel guilty. I think you should more feel revenge or something like that.
No, but isn't it interesting how, as a woman, I feel like I'm always feeling guilty. Always.
It's interesting because as a guy,
yeah,
I don't feel guilty at all.
I love that. You lucky thing.
Like eating a burger, I see that as conquest, or look at me, I'm a real bloke. I ate a burger, and you know what? I had a second one, and extra fries. I'm intrigued though, and it brings us nicely to today's subject of guilt. That you should associate eating a burger as something that you should feel guilty about. What is there to feel guilty about?
I don't know.
With enjoying yourself with some food that you don't normally have?
Yeah.
Why the guilt trip?
I don't know. I feel like sometimes part of being a human being or being a woman is to be completely and utterly disciplined and do everything for everyone. And then once you do something that, quote unquote, you're not supposed to be doing, then you feel guilty about it. And I don't know, sometimes we punish ourselves even. I don't know if you have this feeling sometimes.
Well, maybe this is about definitions.
Yeah, well, let's
because
do it.
Maybe what you're talking about from my point of view isn't actually guilt.
Okay. So before you read the definitions, what do you think it is then?
Well, you are guilty insofar as if it came up in a court of law, you would be found guilty of eating a burger.
Yeah.
Right?
Guilty as charged.
That's just a fact, right?
Yeah. Mm.
It's not anything, it's not a big deal.
No.
But I think you're feeling more ashamed of the fact that you've let yourself, what your perceived values say, I must stay in control of what I eat, and I must be disciplined, and I must stick to this regimen. And today you broke it. So you're not guilty, you're guilty. But the thing that maybe you're thinking or feeling isn't guilt. It's a byproduct of guilt, which is I've let myself down in some way.
Yeah.
Maybe I feel
disappointed in myself.
Disappointed or ashamed or something like that. And I think that's where guilt is a nice choice of word, I think, because when in my research, a lot of what I associate with guilt isn't really guilt. It's the byproduct of guilt, or the next step on from guilt is what happens to it.
And that's what I found difficult when I was researching for this topic, because sometimes I found myself slipping into regret and remorse. And then I was like, oh, but that's not what we're talking about. Let's try and stick to the word guilt.
Yeah, and try and differentiate it.
Yeah.
Because you're right. I don't know about you, but I've got. There's guilt, shame, regret, remorse, yeah. I mean, we could go on.
I think regret and remorse were the closest.
Yes.
The cousins, or the half-brothers of guilt.
We can talk about those a little bit because in terms of a sort of therapy thing, I remember from my own experience of getting into this discussion about regret versus remorse and which ones are good and which is good and which is bad and which ones you should try and get rid of and which you should try and keep. But anyway, so let's do some definitions because I think that helps.
Yeah.
So for me, the most straightforward definition of guilt or being guilty is just the legal one. So it's just a fact that you have committed a breach of conduct, especially when we talk about violating law and often involving some sort of penalty as a result. So I'm guilty of doing 40 kilometres in a 30 kilometre per hour speed limit, for example. Not that I would do, but I'm obviously giving that as an example. I would never. Oh gosh. Yeah. And there's no arguing with that. I am guilty because the law says this and I did something else. Yeah. And I should therefore take the punishment without, complaining about it, even though I would obviously complain. But I violated the law. Okay. So that's okay. Guilt, the state of one who has committed an offence, especially consciously. Or, linked to that, the feelings of deserving blame, especially for imagined offences or from a sense of inadequacy. In other words, self-reproach type thing. And then, third definition, guilt, a feeling of deserving blame for offences. So there's a bit of a sliding scale there. There's at one end it's just a fact. You did this wrong. There's no emotion attached to it. Yeah,
it's just a fact, yeah.
Right to the other extreme, which is that self-reproach and inadequacy and feeling of shame because you did something that was an offence.
I see.
So on the Berger scale, there's no disputing the fact, but the interesting thing is you've let that fact of guilt then slide up the scale, so you're now into self-reproach, shame, blaming yourself because you committed the offence.
I see. So if I cried about it now, would that be remorse?
It would be funny. Sorry everybody, listeners, we've got a scene now. Rama's crying over a burger. I don't think it... Well, this is interesting. Is it the guilt or is it the self-reproach or the remorse or the shame?
I wouldn't say it's shame. I think it's something I have set for myself. It's not something that, society looks down on or anything like that. It's just that it's a goal I set for myself and I kind of let myself down. So I think I'm feeling a little guilty because it was kind of like a law that I made for myself and I broke it.
Yes.
So, but there is a bit of disappointment in myself, that's for sure. It's like, come on, it's just a burger. And it's not like a Michelin burger. It's just a school burger too. So
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Are there examples in your daily life of things that you're guilty of that don't cause that reaction?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, for example, if I'm driving down the Autobahn and it says 120 kilometres per hour, I might occasionally do 125.
Yeah, I would do 130. Yeah.
Did you hear that? Any members of the constabulary? Rama does. She's faster. You might do 130. Do you feel guilty?
No.
Do you feel any self-reproach or blame? Or
no. Interestingly enough, I think I would feel that.
I think that's more of an offence than eating a burger.
I know. I think that if it's only 10 kilometers over, when it's like that, if we're talking about on the Autobahn, I think within the 10 kilometers, I don't feel guilty. I give myself that kind of wiggle room. But also, I think I would feel really guilty if I caused an accident. God forbid.
Interesting.
Then I would feel really guilty. But I'm like, no harm, no foul. It's fine.
How interesting. So if you are letting yourself down, then that is something you feel some sort of emotional response to, clearly. but you are happy to operate within the wiggle room of the, I know the law says 120, but I know I can get away with it up until 130, 32 or something. Yeah. And then that's my wiggle room. So I don't feel any guilt around something that is around my value set is not a problem.
Yeah, well, in ethics, I think they would call that consequentialism. You know, it's like as long as the consequences are fine, there have been no consequences. God forbid any consequences. I haven't caused any harm, then it's fine. But eating that burger with all of the things that came with it, then I'm going to see that on my hips in a few days. You know, it's something that I'm going to have to, I don't know, skip on dinner today or something. Yeah. No, it's not that bad. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated just exploring it because you're not bothered about the 120 to 30 unless it causes an accident. Yeah. Well, but that's an interesting...
But in reality, how different is 130 from 120?
No, that's interesting. But so the example of causing an accident actually is not to do with the speed. Yeah. You would feel guilty if you caused an accident. Full stop. It's not. So that's a bit of a red herring in terms of speed then. Yeah. Yeah. And I would hate myself if I got caught and had to pay a fine. I think within the 10 kilometers you wouldn't pay that much of a fine. I think they even consider that a bit of wiggle room. That's you get 10% or something like that. Did you have different gradations of fine?
I think so. So it should be. This would be okay. But it's funny because I think I alluded to that earlier. Is that women feel guilty all the time, and I'm definitely guilty of that. Oh, I'm definitely guilty of feeling guilty all the time.
Yeah. You're starting to. Yes, you're going into a vortex, a black hole.
But listen,
of guilt.
Really,
but this is so interesting. Why do you think then your premise is that women are more likely to feel guilt than men? Why do you think? So
I went and researched that, and it's interesting because I found some things that confirmed my suspicion that women feel a lot more guilt than men. So what I found is something to do with science, but what I then thought of myself, and I would like to take some credit for this, please, is what has to do with society. Yeah. And that one I'll tell you about later, but let me read to you what science says.
Yes, please.
So I found this article where it says, the differences in the feelings of guilt between men and women are not cultural. At their root, they are genetic. We do not want to say there are differences, but that does not take away from the fact that gender differences are staring us in the face. Shirtcliffe said, that's the scientist who's talking here. In his book, The Essential Difference, the Cambridge University neuroscientist Simon Baron-Cohen.
It is, I think.
That's the cousin.
I think it is, isn't it?
That's the cousin of Sacha Baron. What's his name?
Sacha
Baron-Cohen, exactly. He wrote...
Ali G.
I love Ali G. Is it because I'm black?
Yeah.
So...
Oh dear.
Actually, it says...
I feel guilty for just having waylaid the...
derailed me.
Sorry.
No. The female brain is predominantly hardwired for empathy. The male brain is predominantly hardwired for understanding and building systems. Okay. That's a generalization, of course, it says here. These traits exist on a bell curve, with some women being naturally more system-oriented and some men being naturally more empathetic. But the generally greater female capacity for empathy matters because guilt depends on empathy. Both Shirtcliffe and Summers refer to sex differences as complementary rather than oppositional. Women have been endowed by evolution with neurochemicals that promote mothering, nurturing, bonding. Empathy is required for all three. The differences can be seen from a baby's first days. This is the part that I found really interesting. Girl infants in hospital nurseries are more likely than boys to experience crying contagion, to start crying because they hear another baby crying.
Start moaning at that kind of age already.
Give toys to toddler monkeys and humans, and boys will go for trucks and cars, girls will go for stuffed animals and dolls.
Yeah, isn't that it's amazing, that last point? I tried so hard with all of my children not to fall into gender stereotypes about what kind of toys they have. Yeah. And yet it's as you say,
it's crazy.
It's genetic. It's absolutely true.
But
now,
this thing
I would say that what we're talking here, the definition of guilt here that we're talking about, is that one where you feel that you deserve blame for what you've done. Because I think the other ones, feeling guilt as in, I acknowledge that I was wrong in that situation. I committed an offence. I think that's probably the same for males and females. It's sort of more factual. Because normally you can't really argue with it, can you?
Yeah.
There's a law or there's an expectation on somebody and you broke it. But
the one where it's just perceived guilt.
Yeah, that feeling that you deserve to feel bad because of what you've done. I think that's, again, what you're saying is right.
That's more female, yeah.
I think females carry the load of guilt
because
for a longer period of time, or they express it more than men do. I think men are more likely to say, yeah, whatever.
It is what
whatever,
it is.
It is what it is. I got caught, whatever, I paid the fine.
Yeah.
Or, I didn't behave particularly well in that situation, but, let's move on.
It happens, exactly. But I think for women, it's quite... there's also this thing where the women keep, like, the harmony everywhere. That's their job, basically, is to... And so they feel guilty if the kids are not doing well, and if the relationship is not going well, and if, not everybody around them is happy, then they also feel like, must be me. I don't know why they always take that on.
That's so interesting.
So here's the other thing that I wanted to take credit for, which is the social thing, and I hope nobody has beat me to this amazing idea. If you think about, like, the original sin, when Adam and Eve were...
Women responsible, obviously.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. It's like even in joking, we always say, oh, it was Eve that whispered in his ear, let's do it.
Yeah, of course.
And the funny thing is that in the Quran, the same story exists, but Eve is not mentioned as the one who whispers in his head that, in his ear, that they should do it. It's actually Satan, and Satan talks to both of them at the same time, and they both commit the sin at the same time. And still in the Middle East, the culture says that women are the ones responsible for everything, because look at what happened when they were expelled from Eden and sent to Earth. It's so fascinating. Women are always blamed for everything.
Well, somebody's got to take the blame.
Well, it should be the men. Those who wage all these wars, maybe.
Absolutely. Can I throw something else in there? Because it's just occurred to me. So women then are more likely to feel guilt because they have greater empathy. I wonder whether there's any link with the fact that a completely different piece of research that I was just happened to be doing this week for something else, but the rate of suicide, 3 times as many men commit suicide as women. Yeah. And I wonder whether that's because men's guilt or self-reproach, they cannot express it, or they are unwilling to express it, and they're more likely to express it in a much more drastic way.
That's a very good point.
Whereas women, it's part and parcel of the female...
We're always babbling about things.
Personality is what is it I'm guilty about this week. I don't know if that's true or not, but it just occurred to me that I think men have this vow of silence.
Yeah.
Firstly, it's not the manly thing to do to be continually acknowledging your failings or things that you've done that are wrong.
Yeah.
And certainly that self-reproach, you've got to kind of man up. But the self-reproach then expresses it more in private.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm sure that's part of it, because they don't know how to seek help. They don't know how to talk about feelings. Hell, some men don't even know how to acknowledge their feelings. They don't even know what they're feeling. And this is from experience.
What are you looking at me like that for? Yeah, yes, you're right, I suppose. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I did a bit of... work about looking at the sort of neurological links between guilt and what's happening down in your brain, and definitely a link between guilt and depression.
Yes,
and then the shame that you feel associated with your guilt is much more pronounced in those who are depressive or depressed.
So yesterday I was listening to someone, I can't remember who it was, and it was not related to this, but they said that the rate of depression is a lot higher amongst women than it is in men. which is really interesting. So women are more depressed, but men commit suicide a lot more, which is really interesting as well. Also, maybe one of the reasons why they don't commit suicide is because they would feel guilty. You know, I can't leave my kids. You know, I can't.
I think maybe you're right.
No, I'm
maybe
sure.
That's right.
I'm really sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so continue. What did you find?
In what respect? Just
You said you found some like science about.
Well, just an interesting, a whole range of different links between guilt and what's happening in the brain.
Yeah.
So if you take the most extreme form, is the psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
The psychopath and the neural pathways of the psychopath, that sort of narcissistic personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
Psychopaths do not feel guilt.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the empathic concerns that
Exactly.
you were talking about before. They don't have much regard for the impact that their decisions have on others. And that's related to a lot of the, it's called, the psychopathic personality. Mm-hmm. Distorted moral reasoning, transgressive actions, deficits in social functioning, poor social decision making. And you can look at neurological differences between those people who've got that kind of condition.
That's sociopaths and psychopaths. I think both of them don't feel empathy.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say sociopaths are similar to psychopaths, but they don't have quite the destructive traits that you see in the psychopath. And then you realise that if you take that sliding scale, then certain people who you would classify as normal are not that far from being a psychopath.
Yeah, that's true. Or a sociopath.
Or a sociopath, I'd say, looking at myself in the mirror sometimes. So that's quite interesting. Also, the link between guilt and depression. So a neuroscientist who Roland Donne, who is a neuroscientist working at King's College in London, researching brain activity associated with mood disorders, reporting that people with depression report feeling excessive guilt or self-blame. So he used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, to scan the brains of two groups of people, those who had not had depression and those who had a history. They're a group of people who had depression, but not in the last year, and those who'd had no history of depression. And they were given a whole series of scenarios where they were asked to imagine behaving badly, so being stingy or bossy or unkind. And in the work, they could see the link between the brain regions that are controlling depression and those that are controlling this sort of self-blame. The subgenual region, its exact function is disputed, but a part of it is thought to store information related to social agency or who to attribute responsibility to when something goes wrong socially. And then very close to that part of the brain on the temporal lobe is the anterior temporal lobe, which stores the meaning of social behaviours, such as what it means to act badly. And with these stimuli, they found a different reaction in those two parts of the brain between those who'd had depression in the past and those who'd never had depression. So there's a neurological reason, I guess, for that link. Which I find interesting because you assume that it's all social.
I think I like the latest thing that has been circulated around people is that depression is a physiological thing. It's not just an emotional or something that has to do with the environment.
Well, you kind of earlier said it's genetic as well.
Yeah,
so you're born kind of with some tendency towards.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else? Just that your brain also reacts differently if it's feeling guilty or if it's feeling shame. Again, two different
Regions
parts
in the brain.
of the brain. Again, using fMRI studies. I'm starting to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I really am not. But this time, German scientists in Munich at the Ludwig Maximilians University found that shame sets off high activity in the right part of the brain, but not in the amygdala. Whereas in the guilt state, there was activity in the amygdala and frontal lobes, but less neural activity in both brain hemispheres. The researchers concluded that shame, with its broad cultural and social factors, is a more complex emotion, whereas guilt, on the other hand, is linked to a person's learned social standards, which is kind of what you were saying about yourself and your behaviour. That's really interesting, isn't it?
It is.
So that's why some people feel guilt or shame more than others, because your perception of what is right differs from the person next to you.
And also different cultures and different genders.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting.
And your childhood, back to childhood again.
Oh, yeah. Childhood has to,
Some
an effect on
people
everything.
never feel shame or guilt. And actually, there are some people I can think of that I know in life who don't appear, they're bulletproof.
Yeah.
Nothing shames them. They'll do all sorts. Whereas children, made to feel a lot of guilt and shame while growing up, are likely to continue or even expand on that pattern as an adult.
Yeah. And that's why I think women suffer from this more. Like they start off being genetically, they have the tendency to do it, and then society comes and says, you have to be ashamed of this, you have to be ashamed of that, and so they feel guilty every time they do something that might seem shameful.
Do you think that expectations on a young girl in terms of what is appropriate behaviour and what you should feel shame or guilt about is then markedly different than for a boy?
Oh, absolutely. In the way
how does that manifest for you?
The way they dress, for example, girls have to be very careful how they dress more than boys, for example. You have to be ladylike. You have to behave a certain way. You can't swear so much. What are you, a sailor? So girls have to be. But I must admit that it's better now. It used to be
changed,
much worse before. Yeah,
I remember the best example I give is that. When I was in my early teens and I first ventured into going on a date, like my dad was, "Hey, that's my boy, good lad.
Yeah.
Did you kiss her? Did you kiss her?" Whereas when my sister, you're not going on a date.
Really?
You're not staying out.
After
Later,
10 or
and
something.
if he touches you, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Like the attitude towards exactly the same event
That's
is
so
different,
funny.
isn't it?
Very funny.
You're not going to let the family down with your
behavior. But
whereas the lad, hey,
look at him, he's a man.
Look at him out there.
But things have changed not so much. They have changed slightly. I think with little girls, we try to treat them exactly equally. But I think once they hit puberty, then we revert a little bit back to how, a girl should behave and a boy should behave. And
I hope that things are better than when I was a kid.
No, they
I'd
are.
like to think that, at least the way that I brought my kids up, I haven't had different values.
No.
But I think some of it is just subliminal. I don't think you realise you're doing it.
Exactly.
So-
But even me raising boys, I shame them all the time.
Yeah.
No, but I mean...
They often tell me how ashamed they are that you're their mother. Yeah, it's such a shame for them.
No. But I do have kind of like the same standards with boys that I would have for girls. You have to behave properly. I don't like
Yes.
people who are shameless.
Did you find any literature on guilt? Any nice poetry or any readings? Anything that we can look at?
So I have a longer poem that I think maybe we can save for later because I would like to ask you a question about it.
Okay.
But I found something from The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho, which we talked about before.
Yeah, good book, yeah.
And there was a piece of it that had to do with... so the whole point of The Alchemist is fulfilling your... What's it called?
Potential.
Legend or something. Exactly. Your potential, your dream, what you're chasing. And so it says, The mere possibility of getting what we want fills the soul of the ordinary person with guilt. We look around at all those who have failed to get what they want and feel that we do not deserve to get what we want either. We forget about all the obstacles we overcame, all the suffering we endured, all the things we had to give up in order to get this far. And it's so true. Sometimes we feel guilty for just having what we have and or achieving something, and then we try to play small, we try to dim the light a little bit so people don't feel offended. Have you had that in your life?
I'm looking at that and thinking yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. I don't feel guilty for getting what I want. Mm-hmm. I don't feel guilty. I do feel guilty if somebody else has had to suffer in order for me to get it.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and that's a very, very difficult judgment call to make in today's society.
Yeah.
Because you could say that even getting what I want now, somebody is suffering. They're just not. It's not as highly visible
or immediate,
for me, and I don't see that.
Yeah.
I do think. Again, this overlaps with what we talked about when we talked about, some of the money stuff and inequality. That it's a sliding scale. Mm-hmm. I think for the ordinary person, I don't feel you should feel guilty for, your achievements within a normal society.
Yeah.
But I do think people who are abusing other people extremely in terms of exploitation or taking out, we talked about people whose salaries are obscenely huge, then I think they should feel guilty.
They do.
Because what they're taking out could make such a massive difference
in a lot of people's
lives. And also they have deprived other people of so much in order to have what they have. So I in that respect, I agree. But I think there's other areas where if you can't feel good about your achievements, then what's the point in following them?
Yeah. I think we follow them. We feel we feel great. We feel guilty, and we oscillate between the two all the time. Do you feel guilty sometimes? Now, here's a bigger one that people are talking about all the time: white privilege. Do you feel guilty about your white privilege?
Oh, that's...
I mean, you're a white male. It doesn't get any better than this.
So good a question. Yes and no.
Okay.
The whole subject of collective guilt is such an interesting one. Mm-hmm. And we could apply it to... I could also, white privilege, yes. Mm-hmm. Gender privilege.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, yeah.
So, I should, in theory... As somebody who is part of the, is British, so I think about British colonial history, right? The British role in so much of plundering, whether it's the Elgin marbles or, Greek treasures, Tutankhamun.
The spices, the diamonds,
exactly.
Making countries like mine much smaller.
Educating you, dear.
Thank you, dear.
So there's all of that history. And we've had this in the UK where, the statues of benefactors have been ripped down because they were involved in either the slave trade or colonialism. Mm-hmm. I even look at the Second World War, where the British bombed German cities to pieces. Many would say unnecessarily so. Some would say it was a necessity in order to cause the German people's morale to fall.
Yeah.
But I look at all of those things and part of me feels guilt. Part of me feels guilt because I'm part of the group who were responsible for all of those things.
I don't think you were responsible. You were a baby back then. But
I wasn't born in the Second World War, and definitely when colonial days are gone,
the people who benefit.
I'm not that old.
No, I mean the people who benefited from the world wars, they might have been your parents.
But do you not think that, especially with the world of social media right now, that there is a lot of pressure to feel some guilt or responsibility?
Yeah. I mean, it's trying to make us feel guilty all the time.
I know that, the UK is being asked to apologise for its role in colonialism or in terms of slavery,
And it
etc.
totally should. It totally should. Because we talk about, North Americans and what they did to the Native Americans. We talk about, Australians and what they did to the...
But at what point...
But why did the British Empire never apologise for anything?
Yeah.
I mean, they are the reason why the Middle East is now at war, honestly, because of Sykes-Picot and all of that, what happened.
But I get that. But who is it who's going to make the apology?
Yeah, that's the thing. Exactly.
I mean, who's responsible?
Those people have...
This is a bit like, let's veer onto even more stormy
murkier
waters.
waters.
Let's talk about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So here's a really interesting thing in reading about collective responsibility and the Holocaust. That it's quite complicated, obviously, and I think we can probably still see some sort of... In the culture of this country, there's still a ghost over the population and the way that people behave here and culturally.
Absolutely.
And there's certainly a collective guilt towards what happened. But there wasn't a collective guilt straight after the war.
No.
Because Germans felt that they were the victims after
they
the
were wronged,
war.
exactly.
They were wronged, and because they were dispossessed, they had to move. They lost their homes. Not acknowledging the fact that most of Europe had that done to them by the Germans, but because the last thing that happened in the war was that the German population were on the receiving end. A lot of the German population did not feel any guilt. They just felt let down by their leadership for not having delivered what they had been promised.
For losing the war, yeah.
And then in the years after that, you had this really interesting thing where the German nation started to have this sense of collective guilt. But the people who were responsible at the front end for the atrocities, who were taken to court...
They fled and they were...
No, they pleaded not guilty.
Exactly.
Because they were saying, we're not guilty because we were just following the
orders.
Instructions that we were given.
Yeah.
So, interesting, the further away you are from actually being instrumental in it, you feel a greater sense of collective guilt.
Yeah.
I find that remarkable.
It is remarkable. Maybe it has to do with how good a person you are, because the more despicable you are, the more involved you're in it, and the less shame or guilt you will feel.
Yeah. Well, this is the subject of so many books, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you were a foot soldier in the German army, were you responsible for the atrocities, or were you only responsible if you were the person making the orders?
Yeah.
And it's such a philosophical minefield that
it's like that Milgram, the Milgram experiment, and who's responsible? Is it the scientist giving the orders, or is it the person pushing the button? Or...
Absolutely.
So I found something really cool. It's a bit long, so I'm going to read it really fast.
Okay.
It's there is a boy who was 14, and he is participated in a competition, I think. Is it like a poetry slam or something?
Yeah.
At his school. And it's called White Boy Privilege.
Yes.
His name was Royce Mann.
Yeah.
So I'll try to read it a bit fast.
You should apologise for having a name like that, really, Royce Mann.
He's a man, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So, dear women, I'm sorry. Dear black people, I'm sorry. Dear Asian Americans, dear Native Americans, dear immigrants who come here seeking a better life, I am sorry. Dear everyone who is in a middle or upper class white boy, I am sorry. I have started life in the top of the ladder while you were born on the first rung. I say now that I would change places with you in an instant, but if given the chance, the opportunity, would I? Probably not. Because to be honest, being privileged is awesome. I'm not saying that you and me on different rungs of the ladder is how I want it to stay. I'm not saying that any part of me has for a moment even liked it that way. I am just saying that I fucking love being privileged, and I am not ready to give that away. I love it because I can say fuck, and not one of you is attributing that to the fact that everyone with my skin color has a dirty mouth. I love it because I don't have to spend an hour every morning putting on makeup to meet other people's standards. I love it because I can worry about what kind of food is on my plate instead of whether or not there will be food on my plate. I love it because when I see a police officer, I see someone who's on my side. To be honest, I'm scared of what it would be like if I wasn't on the top rung, if the tables were turned and I didn't have my white boy privilege safety blankie to protect me. If I lived a life lit by what I lack, not what I have. If I lived a life in which when I failed, the world would say, "Told you so." If I lived the life that you live. When I was born, I had a success story already written for me. You were given a pen and no paper. I've always felt that was unfair, but I've never dared to speak up because I've been too scared. Well, now I realize that there's enough blankie to be shared. Everyone should have the privileges I have. In fact, they should be rights instead. Everyone's story should be written. So all they have to do is get it read. Enough said. No, not enough said. It is embarrassing that we still live in a world in which we judge another person's character by the size of their paycheck, the color of their skin, or the type of chromosomes they have. It is embarrassing that we tell our kids that it is not their personality, but instead those same chromosomes that get to dictate what color clothes they wear and how short they must cut their hair. But most of all, it is embarrassing that we deny this, that we claim to live in an equal country and an equal world. We say that women can vote. Well, guess what? They can run a country, own a company, and throw a nasty curveball as well. We just don't give them the chance to. I know it wasn't us 8th grade white boys who created the system, but we profit from it every day. We don't notice these privileges, though, because they don't come in the form of things we gain, but rather the lack of injustices that we endure. Because of my gender, I can watch any sport on TV and feel like that could be me one day. Because of my race, I can eat at a fancy restaurant without the waitstaff expecting me to steal the silverware. Thanks to my parents' salary, I go to a school that brings my dreams closer instead of pushing them away. Dear white boys, I'm not sorry. I don't care if you think the feminists are taking over the world, that the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten a little too strong, because that's bullshit. I get that change can be scary, but equality shouldn't be. Hey, white boys, it's time to act like a woman, to be strong and make a difference. It's time to let go of that fear. It's time to take that ladder and turn it into a bridge.
I wasn't feeling guilty at the beginning of this podcast.
Now you are.
Now I am.
I love that last sentence. Turn the ladder into a bridge.
Take that ladder and turn it into a bridge. Yeah. Do you know what? I 100% agree with the sentiment in there. It is, in many ways, so uncomfortable to be from... I tick all the same boxes in that article.
Yeah.
I was born in the low middle class, white, very white, and had everything. Yeah, I had all the privilege and the starting point that I could wish for.
And unfortunately, everything you feel will be actually multiplied because if you were living in America, because in America, with what's happening, it's much, much worse, unfortunately.
Of course, yeah. But I think like so much has happened in my lifetime to address a lot of the issues in there. Do I feel guilt? No. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's healthy to feel guilt. I don't carry the guilt because it wasn't me.
I didn't decide.
So in a court of law, I'm not guilty because I'm a white boy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I got a large blankie. But I do feel something.
You feel responsibility, I think. I think this is what you should feel. Responsibility to do something about it rather than guilt.
I think it has to be more forward-looking than back-looking.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of the problem with guilt, and certainly my experience in terms of therapy and counselling. Guilt shame, regret, remorse are all not positive things because they are looking backwards on a situation that you can't fix.
Yeah.
So I cannot fix the history.
Yes.
I can't fix the history of my country. I can't fix my genetic, my parentage, and I can't fix my academic success. I've just been lucky.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that feeling guilty about your luck is healthy.
It's not helpful, but you know what I like?
I do think exactly what you said. I need to change that guilt into something that's positive and proactive, and both in terms of my own personal attitudes, but also the way society operates.
I think I really like this humility that you just expressed just now, saying that I was lucky.
It's not a word that
slipped.
It slipped.
It slipped.
I'd just like to apologise to all listeners.
I feel
if
guilty.
I showed any kind of humility there.
No, but I think that's something that we should all feel. I mean, I'm not strictly a white male, but it's easy to mistake me for a European, I think. And so I also feel a little bit of guilt there, because when I see other Syrians being discriminated against, I don't feel any of that.
Yeah.
I do feel a bit of guilt. It's it's similar to something that I've heard of and researched here a little bit. It's called survivor guilt. Have you heard of that?
Yes, and I also feel that too.
Really? What did you survive?
I'm not in terms of my own personal experience, but I can absolutely understand why that would be the case.
Yeah, I feel it because of where I come from. Because I came to Germany in 2005. And then 2011, the revolution started in Syria and all of that. And I totally feel the survivor guilt, because I feel like those who stayed behind are going through so much that actually all Syrians here feel the same way, that we should not be sharing a lot of the good things that are happening. So if we go on holidays and stuff, we should try to be, to
tone it down.
Because like those people are like, they don't have electricity most of the time now. So they have to have generators, they have to have solar panels, and if you can't afford solar panels, then guess what?
Yeah.
And so it's really, we all have the survivor guilt, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, let me throw it back at you, because I understand that. But what can you do? So I'll give you a hypothetical then. So we see a starving children in Africa, or we see shortage of water in Africa, and so we raise money.
Yeah.
We raise money as a charity.
Yeah.
And the charity gives water pumps or whatever to an African country.
Well, hopefully they're not taking all the money to themselves. But
there'll be some executives being paid some seriously large amounts of money for running these charities as well.
Yeah.
See, for me, we've already talked a bit about philanthropy and charity. I have a problem with that as a response, because I feel like charity's there to make me feel better.
Yeah.
So,
but what's the alternative, Tony? What would you like to do?
Just give the money to the country and let them deal with it.
How?
So, I think it's also, there was a TED talk, I can't remember who it was, that talked about the success or otherwise of projects in less developed countries. And she was saying in the TED talk that a lot of projects where Western countries are deciding that this is what is needed, and they raise money and do the development work, it really doesn't help, because it creates that feeling of dependency and just continues the dynamic, which is the very dynamic that you're trying to get rid of.
And then the oppressive governments that like this dynamic as well. They're like, look at the foreign currency.
Yeah, I mean, surely what's better is to provide the funding, provide the money, without the loans, without the large amounts of interest that these developing countries are having to pay back to Western countries. Absolutely. Just provide the money to enable these countries to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet.
But that's what we're doing, isn't it?
Most of these developing countries are hugely indebted to the West.
Oh dear me! I thought we were giving them
charities
charity.
No, charities are, but these countries are also borrowing money.
Oh my goodness!
From the United States or from
European
countries to develop themselves. I'm thinking, we're not writing off their debts. And surely it's far better to provide them with a platform for them to be able to develop themselves, support themselves.
Teach somebody how to fish instead of giving them a fish every day. Yeah.
So I feel like that in the same way as I sort of feel with philanthropy, that I don't think a very, very wealthy entrepreneur should be able to pick and choose what they decide to spend all of that money on. Surely the people who are in need should be deciding. What is the priority.
Yeah, but I think if you do this, then the whole system in the world is, the equilibrium in the world stands on the fact that there are some really wealthy countries and some really poor countries, and that's how exploitation works.
Yes.
If you were to fix these countries and they were now all of a sudden doing genuinely doing well, then that doesn't work for us.
Yes.
So it's by design like this, Tony, to keep them poor and let the money trickle down a little bit.
Of course.
And that's it.
Of course. I mean, we've talked about that before. The system's not going to change any time soon, because the normal person, the average person, back in the original quote that you reading from Paulo Coelho. Thank you. Yeah. The ordinary person who's feeling guilty has no control.
Yes.
Who isn't in a position. I can spend a lot of my time feeling guilty about the state of the world, but I am absolutely no position to do a great deal about it, because I'm being oppressed by the same agencies that the dynamics of the world economy are being oppressed by, just on a somewhat different scale.
Yes. So I'm sure you did some research about religion and guilt in Christianity, maybe?
Yeah, yes.
What did you find?
So at the heart of the Bible on guilt and shame, really, it's pretty straightforward. And this all boils down to the good old Catholic concept of forgiveness through confession. Yeah. So most of the readings or quotations from the Bible on guilt are about putting your trust in the Lord, confessing your sins, and your sins will be forgiven. So I acknowledge my sin to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. So if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I never really got that as a sort of lapsed C of E person. Yeah. That, by confessional or by prayer, I could be forgiven of my sins. Yeah. I sort of always felt it was like a bit of an easy option. It
is a very easy cop-out. I think what should be, so when I research about how it's done in Islam, it's first of all, you have to acknowledge that you did something wrong, acknowledge your sin, promise not to do it again. I think this is the thing, in Christianity, you see a lot of where it's I'll go and confess tomorrow, I'll do something about it.
And then next week go out and do the same thing again. Yeah,
so I think that the promise not to do it again. And then in Islam, there are some ways to kind of make up for your sins. So for example, charity is one of them. Yeah. So like we said before, if you can't fast, for example, then feed a few people who have fasted, who can't afford to have a decent break fast. Yeah. Prayer, of course. It's really funny, or not funny, but it's weird, it's strange, that in some sects of Islam, definitely not Sunnis, but they have this thing about injuring themselves as kind of, making up for the sin. So I'm sure you've seen them on TV where they're they have big chains and stuff, and they're beating their chest or their backs until they bleed.
Wasn't this a guy on the Da Vinci Code who had had a big he had thorns or something around his legs to make him feel pain every time he moved, as a reminder of his sin.
And this is really funny that you mentioned that, because first they started with the day of Ashura, which is what they in some areas in Iraq and Iran, that they do this where they like punish themselves. So it says, among the Shia minority, mourning Hussein, who was the grandson of Muhammad, they beat themselves up every year to like until they bleed. And this is frowned upon in many sects, but it's allowed in some. So just to be clear about it. But then I was like, wait, hang on. I read this part of the Da Vinci Code about Silas, and I was so shocked back then because I thought it was just a Shia thing, but it turns out that some sects in Christianity also do that. So it says here, his faith was ultra-conservative Opus Dei.
Opus Dei, heavily Catholic,
crazy.
Extreme, So
the part of the book says, the measure of your faith is the measure of the pain you can endure, the teacher had told him. Silas was no stranger to pain and felt eager to prove himself to the teacher, the one who had assured him his actions were ordained by a higher power. Hago la obra de Deus. I do the work of God, Silas whispered, moving now toward the church entrance.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because it's exactly like you can always use religion to find the weak, prey on the weak, and make them do your dirty work for you. Yeah. And it's the same with Al-Qaeda and all of that. You know, that's what they do. They find these poor children or poor young men who are lost, the incels, and they tell them that this is the way, you know, and then they do all of the dirty work for them, all this terrorism, horrible things.
Yeah, and I think that was always part of the certainly the Catholic doctrine was that their congregation, it was always made clear to them that they were all unclean and that they were sinners.
That's the thing, is like they're always guilty, right? Like they always, because sinners, Jesus died for our sins.
Absolutely, to cleanse your sins. And so in terms of your own sense, you can understand why, a couple of 100 years ago, people felt so unworthy or felt
guilty.
I am a sinner in society.
Yeah.
So your sense of self-esteem must have been crushed all the time by the church, which is there supposedly to be supporting you. So very strange, really.
Yeah.
So I much prefer the Stoic response to.
So what did you find?
To guilt. It sort of, and it corresponded better to my sort of approach towards guilt. So the Stoics' take on guilt is probably as we'd expected, which is your reaction stems from your own judgments and interpretations of your action rather than the external events or circumstances in themselves. So in other words, it's in your power to change your perspective or alleviate the burden of guilt, because guilt is just something you've created in your head.
True.
It's not the action itself. It's
the emotion that comes with it,
So if you accept responsibility for your actions and focus, as per Stoicism, on what happens next, you can learn from your mistakes and move forward rather than constantly living your life looking over your shoulder at the mistakes you
made in the past,
which is a good, positive thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 4 common types of guilt. Firstly, unintended results.
Is this from Stoicism?
This is from Stoicism.
Okay.
So sometimes we act with the best of intentions, but the outcome isn't what we expected. So we can feel shame or embarrassment because things didn't work out. But that's just bad luck, unintended results. And there are plenty of examples I can think of in my life where I tried my best, I did my best, my intentions were good, just didn't work out. So there's no reason to feel guilty about that. Remorse for wrong actions. We've all done things we knew weren't right, whether this was due to a lack of self-control or selfish motives, and guilt often lives with us, but you can't change it. You can't change what you did, so change it
in the
going
future.
Forward instead, and therefore you've alleviated. We often feel guilt over things others really don't care about.
Yeah.
So you ate a burger, nobody cares, honestly. So don't worry about things that nobody else cares about. It. Don't make it into something that it isn't. And then sometimes, linking to what we talked about with survivor guilt or privilege, we feel guilt for not feeling guilty.
Yeah.
So our mindset and conditioning sometimes makes us feel guilty for not feeling guilty.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no point in that.
That's stupid, yeah.
Yeah. So just one last Stoic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Seneca said, souls that enjoy being sick and seize upon excuses for sorrow are saddened by events long past and effaced from the records. Past and future are both absent. We feel neither of them, but there can be no pain except as the result of what you feel. So in other words, just throw off the baggage from what's happened before. Don't get emotional about what hasn't happened yet, but base everything around what you feel right now.
But some people do enjoy this feeling of guilt because that makes them somehow nobler. You know, like, look at me, I'm a victim of my own nobility, of how good I am, and I'm always feeling bad about the small things that I do.
Yeah.
You know, for example, I feel so guilty because there was a student who wanted to come, he wanted my help, but I wasn't there, and so I feel so guilty about that. Or, you know, it's like, we have to always make sure that we are reasonable when it comes to guilt and not feel guilty about just everything, and take solace in the idea that because I feel guilty about everything, that means I'm trying way too hard and I am a very good person.
I understand those feelings, but for me, I only associate guilt with things that where I knowingly
did something wrong.
Something that hurt somebody else or disadvantaged somebody else. I'm guilty of that.
So we don't feel guilty for inaction, only for bad action?
No, inaction, I can see that as a bad action. Inaction itself is a bad action. If I could have intervened, but I didn't, I feel guilty about that. So I can see that. But for me, I have stronger feelings of shame, regret, and remorse.
Okay.
Depending on the situation. So guilt, for me, is kind of black and white.
Okay.
I did something wrong then. And I can apologise for that. And I can tell myself that was wrong. Next time, don't do that.
Okay. Is it easy for you to say sorry?
I never do anything wrong, Rama. So
oh, yeah. That was just
purely hypothetical.
Yeah.
I am a bloke, so obviously I find it difficult to say sorry. But for me, I feel shame when what I did that was wrong is shameful. So it's kind of those bad things that I did that were really shockingly bad. Like speeding and getting a ticket, I'm not ashamed of that. I just feel a bit unlucky, really. And I'm not a bad person because of it. Yeah. But there are some things that I may or may not have done in my life where actually I'm ashamed of my actions. And the shame is far stronger than the guilt. There's no question about I did something, but I'm ashamed of what happened as a result of it. Yeah. Regret, which I think is a really unhelpful emotion. Yeah. Regret is where you relive the guilt over and over and over again. Because you look back to something and you regret.
I wish I hadn't done that.
I regret it happened. I wish I could undo whatever I did. Yeah. And our Stoic message would say, grow up, Tony. You can't change it. So don't regret anything.
Just look forward.
Accept everything.
Yeah.
And remorse, I think, is a more positive version of regret. Remorse is where, I genuinely wish that hadn't have happened.
I'm sorry.
I apologise for the wrongdoing. I'm going to try and make it right. But I'm not going to live with this ghost
hanging over you.
Hanging over me.
Yeah.
So I sort of operate around those four different concepts. And guilt is only a trigger. Actually, I feel shame, regret and remorse for things that I don't feel guilt about.
Interesting. Because
guilt is when it's kind of your fault.
Okay.
But I've been involved in situations where I could honestly, hand on heart, say, I
didn't do anything wrong.
I didn't do anything. The break of my second marriage. Nobody's listening. I don't feel guilty about that. Yeah. But I do feel regret.
Yeah.
And remorse. And an element of shame.
Oh. Is it because it's your second marriage?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, should learn from your mistakes. Well, yeah, I do. I do feel shame. But the guilt part of it is not at the forefront of that. It's only a very, very tiny, tiny bit. The other three emotions are far bigger.
Very, very interesting. So We haven't done a lot of poetry.
Okay.
Would you like to end this with a bit of poetry before we go?
I've got a number of them. So we could do the Catholic guilt, or we could do a more general. Which would you like?
Why not both?
Both. Okay.
Are they very long?
No, two. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do both classic poets as well. So that's quite good. Bit of highbrow to our.
Exactly.
So how about a hymn to God the Father by John Donne?
I like that. Can we finish with that then?
Yeah, we'll do that last time.
Exactly.
So that can be the forgiveness one.
Yeah.
And then before that, a poem called Guilt by Robert Frost. Again, another classic poet.
Awesome guy, yeah.
Let's see what this says. The clock is frozen in the tower. The thickening fog with sooty smell has blanketed the motor power which turns the London streets to hell. And footsteps with their lonely sound intensify the silence round. I haven't hope. I haven't faith. I live 2 lives and sometimes 3. The lives I live make life a death for those who have to live with me. Knowing the virtues that I lack, I pat myself upon the back. With breastplate of self-righteousness and shoes of smugness on my feet, before the urge in me grows less, I hurry off to make retreat. For somewhere, burns a light to lead me out into the night. It glitters icy, thin and plain, and leads me down to Waterloo, into a warm electric train which travels Surrey through, and crystal hung, the clumps of pine stand deadly still beside the line.
Wow.
That idea of just being so down on yourself or unworthy. I haven't hope, I haven't faith. I live 2 lives and sometimes 3. The lives I live make life a death for those who have to live with me. That's pretty bad,
terrible.
isn't it?
That is guilt.
Knowing the virtues that I lack, I pat myself upon the back. I think I can put that on a T-shirt. Knowing the so in a way, that's kind of a counterpoint, isn't it? To this is somebody who's depressively guilty of just being a bad and unworthy person. In amongst the completely mundane and shit life that they live, commuting to and from Surrey on the train, and that. No kind of element of faith in there at all. There's no call to God for forgiveness or for resolution or anything.
And also no faith in yourself,
Correct,
that's the other thing, is like there's no growth mindset there. Like we always talk about this as teachers. We want our children to know, if whatever it is that you have, there is a way out. You can change, you can get better, you can, I don't know, if you feel like you're unworthy, then become worthy, it's really not that hard.
Whereas that poem it's actually depressing reading it, because you're dragged down into this guy's, he doesn't have a growth mindset, and he definitely doesn't have a way out.
Yeah.
I don't know where. It's like his depression is like a cloud hanging over him.
Yeah, exactly.
Standing deadly still beside the line. Yeah.
Okay, now something uplifting, please. Forgiveness, bitte.
Okay, yeah. This is a hymn to God the Father.
Yes.
So this is uplifting in terms of, the Catholic message that we talked about. Mm-hmm. Wilt thou forgive that sin where I begun, which was my sin, though it were done before? Wilt thou forgive that sin through which I run, and do run still, though still I do deplore? When thou hast done, thou hast not done, for I have more. Wilt thou forgive that sin which I have won others to sin, and made my sin their door? Wilt thou forgive that sin which I did shun 1 year or 2, but wallowed in 1 score? When thou hast done, thou hast not done, for I have more. I have a sin of fear, that when I have spun my last thread, I shall perish on the shore. But swear by thyself, that at my death thy sun shall shine as he shines now, and heretofore. And having done that, thou hast done, I fear no more.
Aww.
So I like that line, swear by thyself that at my death thy son, as in Jesus, but thy son shall shine as he shines now. It's such a nice use of that image.
Yeah.
And that will take away the fear that is there throughout the rest of the poem. Absolution.
It's very good. I really like these two lines. It says, wilt thou forgive that sin which I have won others to sin, and made my sin their door?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Made their sin my door? Like, so I took it as a way for me to join in.
I think the extent to which he has encouraged others to sin
as well.
My sin is their door. They have entered.
Sometimes it's just by doing something that seems so glamorous. And
so I think the first stanza is he's talking about his individual sin, and then secondly he's talking about the extent to which he has caused others to sin because of his behaviour or so interesting.
Very nice. So let's hope that our sins be forgiven.
Well, actually, I need to admit something to you in advance.
Yes.
I'm going to go and have a burger now.
Enjoy it.
I'm going to, and you know what? I feel no guilt whatsoever.
No, you shouldn't. Enjoy it. Enjoy the fries.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing this podcast on guilt. I really enjoyed it.
Very good. I think it was very interesting to start with something a bit grim, like guilt, but still be able to find many different ways to talk about, the human psyche and how we operate in the world.
We did get around some subjects. We've talked about the Holocaust. We've talked about slavery,
wars,
whatever.
Yeah.
So I think to come out of it still smiling at the end is something.
With an appetite to eat a burger. I mean,
I see the appetite for the burger as a very stoic response.
True.
To all of it. If in doubt, go and eat a burger.
Oh, very good. I like that. Well, enjoy. And thank you.
We'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
For another one.
See you for another one. Bye.
We hope that you've enjoyed listening to the readings we chose for you today.
And that our musings have ignited your thoughts.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and those you think would enjoy it.
If you have any thoughts, suggestions, or any kind of feedback, please send us an email using the email in the show notes.
We'd love to hear from you with the words that make you.